Prices are continuing to climb, hurting everyday Americans. But are price controls the solution? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. So, as much as some people say the U.S. economy is going strong, there are many Americans who think otherwise. Mainly the people who can't afford anything. You could tell them to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, but they can't even afford bootstraps. Everything from food to housing has become more expensive compared to just a few years ago. Thanks, inflation. And that could be a major deciding factor in the election. Rarely the one to be quiet, Trump has been pretty open about his economic policies. So what is current Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris's proposed solution? A ban on price gouging, which is just a clever way of saying she's proposing price controls. Brilliant! Just ban businesses from raising their prices. Why has no one ever thought of that before? Oh, they have. But I'm sure it could work this time. Maybe the bread lines won't be so long. Price controls, in this case, are when the government sets a maximum price cap for certain goods or services. So, why exactly is she suggesting this? Well, Harris blames high food prices on things like big corporations jacking up prices, and she's promising to crack down on them. Even though profit margins in the grocery industry only hit 1.6% in 2023, which is pretty similar to pre-pandemic levels. Maybe that's why free samples in grocery stores are so sad these days. A single hazelnut? Gee, thanks, this really entices me. But hey, why not find a scapegoat to blame who you promised to beat in exchange for power? Brilliant! Why has no one ever thought of that before? It turns out that food isn't the only thing in Harris's crosshairs.
We will ban more of those hidden fees and surprise late charges that banks and other companies use to pad their profits. We will take on corporate landlords and cap unfair rent increases. And we will take on Big Pharma to cap prescription drug costs for all Americans.
You know, Harris taking on landlords makes sense. As DA of California, she was a big fan of giving tons of people a free place to stay for years and years. So finally, for the love of all that is good, both sides of the political aisle can actually agree on something. Harris's price control plan is delusional and economically dumb. There's a good reason people are saying this. Sure, price controls do actually keep prices down for consumers. That's true. But be careful what you wish for, because they come attached to some serious consequences. Producers lose motivation to produce goods, make new investments, and create new technologies to make things more productive, because doing so would no longer be profitable. And if there's no profit, there's no real reason to have or open a business. Which I don't think takes an economics professor to understand that businesses like making money. That's kind of their whole thing. And you can't pay employees with compliments and smiles. Believe me, I tried. We lost 3 editors that way. Like that 4. This results in a vicious cycle where producers make less and consumers start buying more because they fear they won't be able to get the products they want in the future. This is exactly how you get shortages and rationing during times of increased demand. And when people get desperate, illegal markets pop up that make items available at loan shark pricing and much lower quality with no oversight or regulation. It's essentially a Walmart, but at Whole Foods prices, and as unsavory and dangerous as a Walmart. All of this is why history is full of examples of price controls going wrong. But hey, who cares about that? You know what they say, those who don't learn from history are doomed to be totally fine. Quit worrying. Classic example in the U.S. is President Richard Nixon's price controls. In 1971, responding to rampant inflation, Nixon abandoned the gold standard, where a country's currency value is directly linked to gold, and implemented wage and price controls that same year, with additional measures popping up again in 1973. This led to shortages in natural gas used to heat homes, meat, steel, household supplies, and more. The only thing that wasn't short in Nixon's presidency were his nose and jowls. People also had to wait in long lines like these just to pump gas due to the effects of price controls. It was like a Costco gas station on Sunday, but every day. It wasn't until the Reagan administration did away with price controls that the U.S. finally solved its gas supply problem. Imagine having to face those kinds of shortages not just for a few years, but even for decades. That's what communist countries like the Soviet Union experienced. The state-planned economy meant strict price controls that resulted in lower quality goods and persistent shortages. It's almost like communism doesn't work. But I'm sure they just didn't do it right. Citizens had to wait in long lines, and many had to resort to bribery or family connections to acquire scarce goods. Things that people in the West would have considered commonplace, like TVs, cassette players, and blue jeans, were pretty rare in the Soviet Union. Yes, blue jeans, making the Soviet Union the only place in time in history that saw a Canadian tuxedo as a height of luxury. So, no matter what industry it involves, price controls have major ripple effects. For example, in the pharmaceutical industry, India, one of the world's largest drug producers, struggles to get manufacturers to produce enough essential drugs because of price controls. It also has to deal with substandard and counterfeit products flooding the market as a result. But hey, what's the worst that could happen if someone got counterfeit drugs? Everyone knows that besides laughter, the best medicine is placebos. Yep. Healing, fentanyl-laced placebos. Even a more developed country like Canada has seen its pharmaceutical industry hollowed out thanks to its price control scheme. This was made pretty clear when COVID struck. Canada was caught completely off guard. It couldn't even manufacture COVID vaccines in the country and had to rely on imports. Even with things like basic necessities, we need look no further than Venezuela to see how price controls have worked out. Hint, not good. If you ever feel nostalgic for the COVID toilet paper shortages, take a vacation in Venezuela. But price controls also don't solve rent problems either. The Brookings Institution points out that while rent control appears to help current tenants in the short run, in the long run, it decreases affordability, fuels gentrification, and creates negative spillovers on the surrounding neighborhood. This has been confirmed by a meta-analysis of more than 200 rent control studies. It turns out that the majority of the studies in the meta-analysis found that rent control leads to higher rent in uncontrolled housing, more people living in properties unsuited to their needs, lower labor mobility, lower supply of rental accommodation, lower quality of rental housing, and less new rental housing construction. But hey, it's a short-term fix. And that's very appealing for a politician in a campaign year. But prices really are out of control, and everyday Americans are really struggling. So if not price controls, what should the solution be? Hint, what we already use: free market competition. If Harris really wants to lower prices without crazy effects, she should identify the production and supply chain barriers that makes things like food and drugs more expensive to produce and sell. She can solve those problems by removing barriers like overregulation. And this can be done. Look no further than Argentina, which is proving to be a success story of what happens when you do just that. Housing supply skyrocketed and rent prices went down. Harris could also focus more on supporting jobs and economic development in low-income areas, ideally with lower skill work like manufacturing. That way, wages go up and people can afford food at whatever the market price is. Actually helping people to help themselves. The problem is, there is a particular ideology going around the country that pretends it's about altruism, but really it's about envy. And it never leads to good things. So you want to see people filled with joy? There you have it. Free market competition sparks joy. Price controls do not spark joy. And you spark joy. So thank you for watching America Uncovered. Here's another episode I think you're going to enjoy. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.